The advent of artificial superintelligence presents an existential risk that escapes standard technological modeling. Policymakers and engineers often misidentify the threat. They treat the explosive output of generative AI as an information authentication problem, a puzzle of verifying what is real and what is synthetic. Applied systems theory offers a different diagnosis. The crisis is a severe, irreversible environmental degradation of our information ecosystem. It is entirely a chaos navigation problem. The Bridge 360 Metatheory model conceptualizes this using the Bulalaka scuba dive metaphor. Imagine descending into a high-risk underwater environment, where the very first constraint you encounter is zero horizontal visibility. Immediately, a massive, swarming wall of fish engulfs you. In our digital ecosystem, these fish represent the infinite streams of deepfakes, synthetic text, and articulated contradictory narratives. Surrounded by moving objects and stripped of fixed reference points, the cognitive system experiences profound vertigo. Left unchecked, this disorientation rapidly accelerates into systemic panic. In this specific, high-entropy environment, relying on a perfectly accurate map is an operationally fatal error. You cannot map an environment that is shifting faster than your capacity to measure it. When complexity runs out of control, static mapping fails. The biological and computational priority shifts away from identifying individual objects and towards surviving the chaos. The technology industry has proposed a standard defense against this generated chaos: strict provenance tracking and LLM watermarking. This approach operates strictly within the truth-seeking paradigm, a framework that treats intelligence as a process of categorization rather than one of navigation. The foundational premise here is that if you can establish the definitive origin of a data point, you guarantee your epistemic safety. Zoom out, and you see the flaw. That single, clearly labeled fish is swallowed by millions of identical, unlabeled, or falsely labeled inputs. Labeling the fish provides isolated data about a specific artifact, but it yields zero navigational utility for the system operating within the swarm. A watermark verifying that a machine generated a paragraph tells you the source. It provides no proof regarding the logical coherence or factual stability of the argument itself. Provenance data cannot instruct a human receiver on how to act when two mathematically authenticated sources deliver completely contradictory directives. Watermarking creates a dangerous illusion of control. It demands a perfectly categorized system, failing completely when informational visibility approaches zero. Escaping this trap requires a shift in priorities. We must move past the truth-seeking paradigm and adopt the entropy attractor intelligence paradigm. The core function of this new paradigm is entirely different. It tracks systemic trajectories toward viability rather than plotting exact ontological coordinates. In the scuba metaphor, these vertical vectors are the bubbles. You don't need to map the ocean floor. You watch where the bubbles are going. In information theory, this is tracking the normalized entropy eigenvector, the stable direction of system cohesion. The barrier to the old truth-seeking approach is formalized in philosophy as Quinean underdetermination. Willard Van Orman Quine established that language is inherently slippery. Absolute reference is almost always practically inscrutable. Empirical evidence alone is rarely sufficient to isolate and prove a single unambiguous theory without relying on a web of prior assumptions. Because evidence is underdetermined and reference is inscrutable, tracking absolute truth through runaway complexity requires an infinite computational budget. In the turbulence of an artificial superintelligence inflection point, truth is simply too computationally expensive to serve as our primary navigational tool. The failures of the truth-seeking paradigm are visibly playing out in the breakdowns of current generative AI models. When a generative model operates with an unbounded truth budget, it lacks internal friction. It attempts to answer every query as if it possesses total mapping capability. Confronted with epistemic gaps, the system freely and confidently invents data to connect the disparate nodes. Systems lacking constraints produce sophistry as a default output. This invention of data, hallucination, is the mathematical result of a model attempting to bridge gaps without a finite entropy budget. The entropy attractor intelligence paradigm governs generative freedom by enforcing this hard fragility cap. It stops the reasoning system before it becomes dangerously brittle. The specific requirement for navigability ensures that near-future choices remain clear, respecting a finite informational budget without causing an epistemic blowout. We can formalize this boundary mathematically. This equation defines temperature not as physical heat, but as an entropy rate parameter. It calculates the exact rate of entropy exchange a system can tolerate inside a strict governance corridor. By enforcing these mathematical limits, the very definition of intelligence is rewritten. Intelligence is no longer defined as the accurate representation of reality. It is the continuous, budgeted minimization of entropic blowout. This framework must dictate not just artificial architecture, but human cognitive architecture, forming the core of the Bridge 360 philosophy of education. The technology industry instinct is to build external detection systems and hope humans follow the labels. The urgent priority is to build resilient human receivers. The human receiving system, the diver in our metaphor, must be actively trained to track trajectories when the map inevitably fails. This training develops the capability to identify competing entropy attractors, recognizing which streams of information pull a system toward stability and which pull it toward collapse. It builds the precise cognitive reflex required to detect high-fragility inference pathways before they are acted upon. Equipping the mind with this architecture preserves human optionality and agency, securing our navigation even when every external provenance marker is stripped away. A human capacity for chaos navigation is a mathematically superior, highly durable defense against generative noise. There is a critical academic caveat to this metatheory. The entropy attractor framework does not declare that truth is dead or meaningless. Truth-seeking remains a highly effective, specialized tool, but it only functions safely within strictly defined environmental parameters. Those parameters define what philosopher Thomas Kuhn called normal science. Normal science occurs when paradigms are stable, the informational water is clear, and epistemic visibility is high. In these specific zones, individual nodes can be highlighted, accurately measured, and authenticated without straining the system. Truth is a luxury of stability. You can safely utilize it only when your system's entropy budget comfortably affords the calculation. This dictates the exact operational relationship between traditional LLM watermarking and the Bridge 360 framework. Watermarking is not useless, but it must be demoted in the hierarchy of AI safety protocols. It is one dial on the wrist console. It provides a useful data point regarding provenance, but it is not the master compass. Provenance tracking serves as an auxiliary governance signal. It is not, and can never be, a primary epistemic authentication mechanism. This leaves policymakers, educators, and engineers with a stark warning regarding the infrastructure we are currently building. A society that functions only when trillions of data points are perfectly labeled remains inherently fragile. In high-entropy environments, that reliance effectively paralyzes our ability to make collective decisions. To avoid this, we must prioritize educating human minds to survive and navigate when the labels inevitably fail.